On today's episode, we're taking a wee break from colonial surnames to turn our attention to three phrases and labels that most Americans learned incorrectly. For instance, why do many Southerners argue that there ain't no Bible like the King James Bible? Did John Knox establish the Presbyterian Church? And finally, where did the ethnic label Scotch Irish originate? Grab a cup of your favorite beverage and sit back for a short trip to the 16th and 17th centuries. I hope you'll join me. It's perhaps difficult to imagine that the man who authorized the English translation of the sacred scriptures that is so highly regarded by Protestants in the Bible Belt would be born into a Roman Catholic family. King James VI of Scotland was born in 1566, the only son of a marriage between Mary, Queen of Scots, and her cousin Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. They weren't even from Arkansas, folks. That's what's amazing to me. They weren't from Arkansas. At the time of James's birth, the Scottish Reformation was only 6 years old, and the fires of Protestant revival were burning brightly in the southern part of Scotland. Sadly for the infant, his father was murdered allegedly by the man whom his mother soon married. Mary's hasty marriage to the Earl of Bothwell in the wake of her husband's violent death was a profoundly inept political move to make in a country bent on attaining pious Christian perfection. Darnley's death and Mary's subsequent marriage sparked a short-lived civil war that ended her reign and honeymoon. Her disgraced husband fled to Denmark, and Mary sought refuge from her first cousin once removed, Queen Elizabeth I of England. Being a Protestant, Elizabeth refused to meet with Mary, who, despite her problems at home, was an heir to the English crown through Margaret Tudor, Henry VIII's sister. To Mary's chagrin, she was arrested and incarcerated. While Mary, Queen of Scots, languished in English prisons until her execution in 1587, Scotland was governed for 16 years by a regent on behalf of her son. As a youngster, James was taught theology and academic subjects by Calvinist Protestants, mostly at Stirling Castle and under the tutelage of George Buchanan. In appearance, James was an ungainly and awkward man. Perhaps because of his Calvinist upbringing, he was deeply interested in theology. He was brilliant, but his intellect was tempered by a wayward and prickly personality. Unlike Queen Elizabeth, he was extremely shy in the public arena. As an administrator, though, James was generous in his political favors to people, including those of questionable integrity and political talents. Besides his mother, James was the only living heir to the English throne. With his eyes firmly fixed on his future, he relished the thought of inheriting the power and wealth that came with the uncontested throne of England. Perhaps because his mother was his only competition, he never begged for her captor for her life, nor did he ever visit her in prison. James wanted to ensure himself a smooth ascension to power upon Queen Elizabeth's death, so he continually sought her favor. If you're interested in burials, it's clear that James favored his mother over Elizabeth, who rests in the same Westminster Abbey crypt as her detested sister, Mary Tudor, that's Bloody Mary. James's efforts to please Queen Elizabeth's court didn't go unrewarded. In 1603, James VI of Scotland assumed the English monarchy, and while still reigning as Scotland's James VI, he moved his residence to London to become England's King James I. Afterward, he ventured back to Scotland only one time. James was the first monarch to have the power and resources to bring law and order to the border region. In recognition of this fact, he gave himself the title of King of Great Britain. Despite King James's shortcomings, he made a positive impact on the lives of lowland and borderland Scots, peasants mostly, who had never known freedom or prosperity. To the Protestant and English-speaking people of the lowlands, he granted lands in Ulster, that's the 9 northern counties of Ireland. Many lowland peasants, especially those in the border region, must have seen James as a liberating hero, similar to the way African Americans regarded President Abraham Lincoln. To the peasants' descendants who made their way into Appalachia's backcountry, James's legacy was unimpeachable. Today, many descendants of the South's pioneering Celts still respect King James and regard his version of the Bible as the final authority on God's revelation to humanity. When Henry VIII officially broke away from the Roman Catholic Church in 1534, he maintained the Episcopalian structure of the Roman Catholic Church. There was, however, one major difference. The Pope was no longer the head of the English or Anglican, Irish or Welsh churches. The monarchy assumed the headship and directed all major ecclesiastical policies, including theological policies. In Scotland, by contrast, the Protestant Reformation arrived in 1560 under the strong leadership of John Knox, a Scot who had studied theology and church organization under John Calvin in Geneva, Switzerland. Although King James was raised by Calvinists in Scotland, he and his son Charles I and grandson Charles II imposed the episcopal structure on Scotland. They intended to create a uniform church structure with the monarchy as its head. This structure would make it less troublesome to govern the Christian people of England and Scotland. King James famously declared that no bishop, no king. Theologically, the two church systems became increasingly alike as the Calvinist ideas of the Protestant Reformation swept through England and Ireland, a result of the work of Puritan reformers for sure. In the year 1643 to 1647, an assembly of ministers or divines was convened at Westminster Abbey in England. The fruit of their work was the Westminster Confession of Faith, together with the larger catechism and shorter catechism with scriptural proofs. Despite similarities in theology, the two churches maintained different organizational structures with authority resting at opposite ends of a power continuum. The Episcopal organization of the Anglican Church has a centralized power structure. In such a system, the priest or rector answers directly to a bishop, who in turn answers to an archbishop. The archbishop ultimately reports to the monarch. In contrast, the Presbyterian form of government, which is oftentimes mistakenly attributed to John Knox, born in 1514, died in 1572, features a representative democracy type form of polity. In fact, Knox was indifferent to that form of government. Knox's successor, as leader in the church matters of Scotland, was Andrew Melville. He was a catalyst for Presbyterianism. He influenced many young preachers through his work as the principal of the University of Glasgow and the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. In addition to falsely attributing Presbyterianism to Knox, there's a misconception about the founding of the Presbyterian Church. The first church body to be governed by a Presbyterian polity or governance structure was not in Scotland. It was formed by ministers accompanying the Scottish military officials in Ireland in 1641 to 1642. The founding was actually 1642. They went there to put down a Catholic Irish uprising. This body grew into the Presbyterian Church of Ireland. It was from early Presbyterianism that American Presbyterianism was planted. However, the intellectual foundations of Irish and American Presbyterianism was laid by students of Andrew Melville at the University of Glasgow, my alma mater. The Presbytery of Philadelphia was established in 1706 by Francis McCamey, an Ulster-born missionary, and 6 other preachers. However, McCamey had established the Rehoboth Presbyterian Church in Somerset County, Maryland in 1683, some 23 years earlier. McCamey is not only the founder of American Presbyterianism, but he is also the first person to hyphenate his Irish and Scottish ethnicity. When he enrolled at the University of Glasgow, Melville's legacy was still influential there then. He registered as Franciscus Maximus Scoto Hibernus, which translates to Francis McCamey, Scotch-Irish. Well, folks, that's all I have for you today. If you'd like a free copy of the catalog of surnames and early families that I've covered on the Vantage Point, write to me at vantagepoint22@gmail.com and I'll send it to you as a PDF attachment. Until I see you again, God bless you and yours.